Hello, my name is Arthur. In this video we're going to look at what I did to assemble the Y-sorting building and get the images out of Blender, prepare them in GIMP, and then assemble them in Godot. So more or less, it's just a simple model, which we're not going to do simple modeling here. I have a building and a foundation. These things are all inside of my working blend, so they're in the blend that I discussed when I did the topic of scale. How everything is oriented, the camera is oriented exactly the same as it was for rendering tiles. And the building and its foundation are on the origin exactly as though they would be centered on a tile. Except I'm not rendering tiles anymore. That doesn't need to be done. So the first thing that I would be looking to render is an image of the foundation. And the foundation is perfectly centered in what would be the same PNG file as a tile file. So that's rendered and saved. Then an image of the building with the foundation is rendered, and to do that I'm just changing the Y resolution, so I'm changing it to a square resolution. If I just change Y, I'm not changing the scale. In order to actually affect the scale, I would have to change both values. Like if I changed both values to 512 by 512, the centering of the camera wouldn't change. The framing would be exactly the same. I would just end up with a building that's twice as big as I need it. But by only changing the one resolution, the Y resolution, I'm not changing the scale of the render. The scale of the render is not being altered. Only the aspect ratio of the render is being changed from a 2 to 1 to a 1 to 1 aspect ratio, and the scale will remain the same. So with the resolution, or not the resolution, but the aspect ratio of the camera changed in this fashion, I would render both the building and its foundation. That's a reference image for use in Godot. And then I would render an image of just the building. Now, the orientation of this building is wrong for a player unit, but it's right for an enemy unit, and I don't need to change the orientation or model a second building to make it right for a player building. So we'll have a look at that inside of GIMP. And let's just shut these down so I can do it from the beginning. And hopefully I can do it in enough time, because there's a fair amount of stuff to cover here. So one of the first things that I'm looking to open is directly from my Godot project file. I'm going to open up the blank tile. So I have a copy of the blank tile. Then I want to open up from the desktop where I saved the foundation of the building. So this is the foundation of the building. Now, like I said, its orientation is wrong. So to change its orientation, all I have to do is manipulate the image itself that's rendered. I can just flip it horizontally. Now it has the proper orientation for a player building. So Control All, Control Copy, and Control Paste. So that's the foundation tile to be exported into my tile map in Godot. So we can close that up. That's a very easy graphic to create that tile. And can be done the same way for any of the buildings. It's always going to work the same way. It doesn't matter how big the foundation is, as long as the framing of the camera and the resolution is left the same. So we'll discard that. And we'll open up the other two important images. There's the refinery. This one's already been flipped. As well, there is inside this folder, there's the full refinery. So the full refinery is just a reference image. All that I need to do to it is crop to content. I can export it, put it into my Godot project, and it's used to build the building inside of Godot. For the actual building images to use in Godot, that takes a little bit more work. So we're going to go image, crop to content. We'll look at the scale that we got out of it, and I'm going to round it up to the nearest 50s. So I'm going to go image, canvas size. I'm going to change this to 250, this to 150, center it in the canvas, and that will resize the canvas. Then I want the grid, so show the grid, and snap to grid. Then I'm going to use the grid snapping to cut out certain portions of the image. The roof is a special case. Its Y sorting is very simple, so it can be cut out in one chunk, and this is the chunk I decided on. Largely because I don't anticipate that there'll be any Y sorting issues from units being taller than this. And it could turn out that I'm wrong, but so far it doesn't appear that I have been. So I would simply cut that out, Control X, Control Paste, make it into its own layer, and while it's still sitting in the copy, oh geez, I can't remember the word for it. While it still exists as a copy, I can just go Control Shift Paste, and that will create a new image from the clipboard. Clipboard is the word I'm looking for. And that creates image number 1. Then it's a matter of cropping out the bottom images. And what I did, and this is open to experimentation, is I did it in rows of 20. So I did it by 20 pixel, 20 pixel, 20 pixel, to result in the fair significant amount of images that I have to construct my building. So each of those is copied into an image, exported with a number, and loaded into a folder that I call refinery for this building, and to end up at the 12 images required for the building, and then the full refinery, which is the image used to template the construction. So we'll just turn off all of the images here except for the background and get an idea how the background is used. Now, when this image is loaded in, it's not centered like this. It's off center. It needs to be given an offset, and the offset it's given is so that the two corners here match up with the axis line. That completely centers the image origin into exactly where the center of a tile would land if this was plopped onto the center of a tile. Then image by image I go through and line them up. For the roof, it's given a considerable offset. This is the origin of the roof down here. I gave it an offset of -86 because everything is going to sort behind the roof portion. Nothing's ever going to be in front of it except for an aircraft, and that's a special case, which, well, we'll discuss that later. Then the position of the roof is altered until it perfectly lines up with the reference image. And once the roof is lined up and the first sprite is lined up with the reference image is no longer required, and each sprite can be put into its proper location. It's very easy to see a 1 pixel gap in between the images from this point forward. Now, each image is given an offset, and the offset it's given is more or less to line the origin of the image up with the edge of the graphic. So each one is given an offset. This one is -8 to get it more or less on the edge. And as we go through the images, we'll see my offsets and origins more or less line up with the edges, but they're not perfect and they don't need to be. Once the offset is set into the image, we then use its position to move it into the right location. And it's very easy to see when an image isn't quite in the right location. Quite easy to see that 1 pixel mistake and to get them to line up into exactly the right locations. So I just lined up all of the images in that fashion, and this part is a fair amount of work because I went with the small 20 pixel slices. This last image is never used, and the building, as we can see, the two corners are intersecting with the axes, and this building will now build in the appropriate location to be centered on its foundation tile. So in the next video, we'll come back and we'll look at the scripting for getting the building cursor, placing the tile, and then the offset that's used to get the foundation to build into the center of a tile when the textured are not centered textures. Because none of my tiles have centered texture, there's an offset to get the building to build onto the tile properly. So that'll be in the next video. We'll be looking at script. I hope my explanation was clear enough and that this video was useful. And until the next video, take care.